The Nobel Prize is the most prestigious award a human being can receive. Einstein got one. Marie Curie got two. It is supposed to represent the very best of human thought. So why did it sometimes go to monsters? Not metaphorically. Actual people who caused mass death, supported eugenics, experimented on prisoners, and helped create weapons of annihilation. And the committee handed them a medal anyway. This is not a list of bad science. This is a list of what happens when prestige meets history. Number 5. Johannes Fibiger. Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine, 1926. In the early 1900s, cancer was a mystery with no clear cause. So when Danish scientist Johannes Fibiger announced he had induced cancer in rats by feeding them parasitic worms found in cockroaches, the world erupted. A caused bee, a controlled experiment. For the first time in history, someone had deliberately given an animal cancer in a lab. The Nobel Committee didn't wait. They awarded him the prize in 1926. He died a year later, before anyone had seriously tried to replicate his work. Then, scientists tried to replicate his work. It didn't replicate. What Fibiger had actually done was feed rats a diet so deficient in vitamin A that their tissues became precancerous on their own. The worms were almost certainly irrelevant. The tumors weren't cancer in any meaningful modern sense. The entire foundation crumbled. To this day, Fibiger holds the dubious honor of being considered by many scientists as the single worst Nobel Prize decision in the history of the award. Not because he was evil, because the committee was too eager, too fast, and too dazzled by a compelling story to wait for the truth to catch up. Science moves slowly. Prestige doesn't always wait. Number 4. Egas Moniz. Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine. You have almost certainly heard of the lobotomy. In the 1930s, Portuguese neurologist Egas Moniz developed a procedure where a surgeon would drill into a patient's skull and sever the connections between the frontal lobe and the rest of the brain. The goal was to treat severe mental illness. What the committee did not weigh carefully enough was what calmer actually meant. Thousands of patients subjected to lobotomies didn't recover. They were diminished, unable to make decisions, unable to feel like themselves at all. Some died during the procedure. American physician Walter Freeman took the technique and turned it into an industrial assembly line. He performed over 3,400 of them. Moniz himself was shot and partially paralyzed by a former patient. The Nobel Prize was never revoked. Multiple petitions have been filed asking for it to be rescinded. The Nobel Committee has refused every time, citing its policy of not revoking prizes retroactively. Tens of thousands of people had their minds surgically destroyed in exchange for the illusion of a cure, and the man who started it has a gold medal. Number 3. Fritz Haber. Nobel Prize in Chemistry. This one is genuinely complicated, and that's exactly why it belongs here. Fritz Haber solved one of the most important problems in human history. In the early 1900s, the world was running out of nitrogen, the essential ingredient in fertilizer. Without it, crops fail. Without crops, billions starve. Haber figured out how to pull nitrogen directly from the air and turn it into ammonia at industrial scale. Half the nitrogen atoms in your body right now came from it. Somewhere between 3 and 4 billion people are alive today because of what Fritz Haber figured out in a German laboratory. He also invented chemical warfare. When World War I broke out, he developed chlorine gas as a military weapon and personally supervised its first deployment at the Second Battle of Ypres in 1915. He stood in the trenches as the yellow-green cloud drifted toward Allied lines. Thousands of soldiers drowned in their own fluid. His wife, Clara, also a chemist, begged him to stop. He refused. She shot herself with his service pistol the same night he returned home from supervising the attack. He kept going. He developed phosgene. He developed mustard gas. He turned chemistry into a machine for killing people slowly and horribly. He received the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 1918, the same year the war ended. Scientists across Europe boycotted the ceremony in protest. He died in exile in 1934, fleeing the Nazis, despite having spent his life serving Germany. His work on pesticides would later be adapted into Zyklon B, the gas used in Nazi death camps to murder hundreds of thousands of people. Fritz Haber fed the world and then helped poison it. The Nobel Committee chose to honor only half of that story. Number 2. Alexis Carrel. Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine, He essentially laid the groundwork for modern vascular surgery and organ transplantation. The Nobel Prize made complete sense. He was also a devoted eugenicist who advocated the extermination of what he called inferior human beings. In his 1935 book, Man the Unknown, Carrel wrote approvingly of using poison gas to eliminate criminals, the mentally ill, and other people he deemed unfit to live. He believed society should be managed by a scientific elite who would use selective breeding to improve the human race. He called for euthanasia institutions to be built and used freely. When Nazi Germany began implementing eugenics policies, Carrel praised them enthusiastically. During the German occupation of France in World War II, a government-backed institution whose mandate was to study, categorize, and rank human beings by their perceived social value. He died in 1944 before he could be fully investigated for collaboration. His name was on medical schools, hospitals, and streets in France for decades after the war. Most were renamed after public campaigns in the late 2000s forced the issue into the open. A man who won the Nobel Prize for saving lives also wrote a serious, sober, popular book about the most efficient ways to kill people he found inconvenient. It sold hundreds of thousands of copies. Number 1. Johannes Stark and Philip Lenard. Nobel Prize in Physics. Both were brilliant physicists. Lenard won in 1905 for his work on cathode rays. Stark won in 1919 for discovering the Stark effect, the splitting of spectral lines in electric fields. Real contributions. Real science. Both became the most prominent scientific supporters of Adolf Hitler. Both helped create a movement called Deutsche Physik, German physics, whose explicit goal was to purge Jewish science from German academia. What was Jewish science? Relativity. Quantum mechanics. The two most important theoretical revolutions of the 20th century. Einstein's work, Heisenberg's work, Bohr's work, all of it condemned as a racial conspiracy. They wrote propaganda. They gave speeches. They used their Nobel credentials to lend scientific legitimacy to the Nazi regime. Stark ran the German Research Foundation and the Physical Technical Reich Institute, using both positions to fire Jewish scientists and redirect resources toward Nazi priorities. When Einstein fled Germany in 1933, they called it a victory. What they helped create was a catastrophe for German science that it took generations to recover from. Germany, which had dominated physics for decades, collapsed as its best minds fled to America and Britain. Many of those minds, many of them Jewish scientists driven out by people like Stark and Lenard, would go on to build the atomic bomb. The very physics they called a Jewish lie ended the war. Lenard was classified as a fellow traveler of Nazism. Stark was convicted as a major offender and sentenced to 4 years of hard labor, later reduced. Neither Nobel Prize was ever revoked. The Nobel Committee has always maintained that prizes are awarded for science, not for the person, that the work is separable from the life. But scientists are not variables in an equation. They make choices. They use their platforms. They decide what to do with their knowledge and their moment in history. The prize says, "This is the best we produced." Sometimes it was also some of the worst.